Who's Dr. Stinky McDougal?
You mean the legend?
He's a real buckaroo banzai kind of guy.
I watched him dice a guy into pieces with 6 f***ing words on it.
Stinky's the most inconvenient man in most rooms.
He's a master of drunk boxing.
Every time Stinky calls, my blood pressure skyrockets!
I heard he's staging an evolution.
Dr. Stinky McDougal says the difference between a revolution and an evolution is the conscious choice not to break everything in the transition.
And now, broadcasting from the borderless territory of Liberty Valley, Minnesota, here's your host, Dr. Stinky McDougal! Shake it, baby!
Hey, welcome to the Stinky McDougal podcast. Our guest today is a long-term Hollywood publicist, Dan Harary. And while Hollywood's not usually on the list of things that I cover, Dan has some very unique experiences with not just sightings and his family's experience within the phenomenon, but he's also had apparition and ghostly experiences, and has written a book on that, in fact, called My Paranormal Life. Dan, more importantly to my larger story, and I think as actually part of that same paranormal story, has teamed up with an old friend of mine, Steve Bassett, who you might remember we had on last fall, and together they formed the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. And Steve was actually talking about that when he was on the show, because they had literally just formed it. And now we have the chair of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, which is Dan Harary. Dan, welcome to the Stinky McDougal podcast. And you come to us from California, I understand?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It's very cool. I appreciate it. I'm in Beverly Hills, California. This is my office. I work from home. This is my office in my home. And I've been a Hollywood publicist, Bob. This year is my 40th year. So I've been a Hollywood publicist for 40 years. I've been in LA 44 years. And I've been working with celebrities. In fact, we can briefly get to this. This is my very first book. This came out 2 years ago, called Flirting with Fame. I started working with rock stars when I was in high school, from 1972, 74. I grew up in Asbury Park, New Jersey. I had long hair. I was a drummer. You can see my electronic drums behind me. And I had a light show. My best friend and I had a light show. And we were in bands together. He played guitar. And we became the stage managers for a little concert hall called the Sunshine Inn, a block from the Asbury Park Boardwalk. Well, guess who started out in Asbury Park? Bruce Springsteen, right? Everybody knows that. So I worked with Bruce Springsteen. 1973, I was 16 years old. My friend and I did a couple of shows with him. We did set up his amps and his stuff, and we stood on stage while he was rehearsing and when we ran his light show and stuff. So I worked with Bruce Springsteen in 1973. I was 16. I just turned 68. So I've been working with with celebrities well over 50 years. It's just the thing that happened to me along the way. It's my professional career is the entertainment industry.
That's very interesting. Over those years, have you found different stars are more open to the phenomenon occurring, either the UFO phenomenon or to the ghostly phenomenon? How much, I guess the question is, how much afterlife and phenomenon is there in Hollywood? Do you have a lot of stories from stars?
Well, okay, that's a great question, and it's a fair question. I've only been immersed in this field, Bob, for a year and a half. That's all. A year and a half. So all the celebrities I've worked with, we didn't talk about aliens or ghosts or UFOs. It was TV shows, movies, charity events, award shows, right? Dinners, black tie dinners, interviews with People Magazine, CNN, the New York Times. I've only been immersed, believe it or not. Now, I've been personally studying ufology for about 20 years. But my book, this came out last year, March 2023. And in the last year and a half, I've become, because of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance we can talk about. So now I'm known as a UFO guy, a Hollywood UFO guy. And I think there aren't too many of me that exist. But, I'll give you a couple examples from the last year and a half. I've become good friends with Thomas Jane. Thomas Jane's a movie star. He was the Punisher. He was in the movie 61. He played Mickey Mantle. He was in The Expanse. He was in a couple of Stephen King shows called The Mist and The Vanishing. He's a great guy, super nice guy. Here. Oh, I used to have his picture right there. So he's a friend of mine. I have my own podcast on Thursday nights called Live from Hollywood. It's Paranormal Tonight. It's only been on since January this year. So a few months ago, I interviewed Thomas Jane. He is a movie star. And he's writing a book as we speak called A Human's Guide to Visiting Aliens. And I said, well, Thomas, it's very interesting. Have you had experiences with aliens? And he goes, yeah. And I go, oh, really? Can you please tell us? And he goes like this. He's like, and we're a live podcast. He goes, oh, Dan, I really don't want to talk about it. I really don't. And he's like staring at the floor. I go, Thomas, yeah, you must have a great story. Come on, man. You can do it. You can tell us. Come on. Dan, it's not a good story, man. It's not a good story. What I got out of him was he was asleep in his house. He lives in Silver Lake, which is near Hollywood. He was asleep in his bed at 3 a.m. He woke up, couldn't sleep anymore. He went downstairs to lay on the couch. As he's in his living room, an entity, some kind of not pleasant entity, came into his house, and something bad happened. And he will not, that's all I got out of him. He said, I will not discuss it. He got very, very upset.
That's one of the things about Dr. Mack's work when I delved into the abduction phenomenon.
Yeah.
That really just grabbed me is he said, look, these people are suffering from post-traumatic stress. They had a very real experience. And that was for me a very profound moment when, a professional dealing with trauma and stresses says, these are people experiencing very real traumas and stresses. So it's not surprising that he wouldn't want to talk about it. Well,
he was like not ashamed, but he was embarrassed by this story. Okay. Now I'm guessing, and my guess is something entered his home and he was either abducted or he was experimented on, but he's he said it was very, very dark and it was an awful experience. So whatever it was, now you made a very good point. And in fact, I just became friends with Yvonne Smith. Okay. You know Yvonne Smith, I'm sure. Yvonne Smith is going to hypnotize me on August 30th, I think it is, because of an experience I had, and we'll talk about from my paranormal life. I have missing time, and we can do that story in a minute. But so Thomas Jane had another better story. He goes, Dan, I don't want to talk about that one, but I have a better story.
Oh, good.
And I said, tell me. He goes, when he was 8 years old, he was in Montana with his father and his grandfather at a cabin in Montana. He's like got 50 something now, so it's a long time ago. And they woke up very early one morning to go fishing. So they're in a truck. The grandfather's driving a truck. His father's in the front seat. Thomas Jane, 8-year-old Thomas Jane's in the back seat, and they had a sunroof that was open. And they're driving in the dark. It's like 4:30 in the morning in Montana. He goes, we're driving to the fishing hole to go fishing, and an orange UFO appeared above the car, and directly above Thomas. He was in the back seat. So he looks up, and he sees this cool thing, and he goes, Granddad, Dad, there's a UFO above our car following us. And he said his grandfather and his father were like this. They didn't turn back. He said they were switched off. Their brains were like switched off. They didn't turn back to talk to him in the back seat. They didn't respond to him. They just kept driving, facing forward. And I said, Thomas, it sounds like that was a private show just for you. And he goes, yeah, I guess so. He goes, they never saw it. They never talked about it. They didn't turn back to talk to me. And then once the UFO left, then his father, then they turned around. So I think that's a pretty cool story.
That is a very, very cool story. Now, you yourself have had a few sightings as well. And one of the things when I listened to one of your interviews when you talked about it is that you discovered much later in life that your father had actually possibly worked on exotic materials, but that wasn't aware to you at the moment you had your sighting. So tell that story for me, if you would.
Sure, absolutely. Well, that sighting changed my life just in the last couple of years, and that sighting took place in March 1970. Right. That's why it's really it is a remarkable story. It is. In March 1970, New Jersey Shore, suburban New Jersey. My father picked me up from school one day, and he was driving me home in his car. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And as we're driving down our neighborhood, I look through the windshield, and there's a huge silver V, letter V, UFO craft hovering above my father's car, just hovering above the car.
How high? How high above you was it?
300 feet, 400 feet.
Okay, not right on. It wasn't on, but I mean, but it was easily visible. Not so, about a football field away.
Yeah, perhaps. Yes, it wasn't high up. It wasn't very high up at all.
Okay,
but it was big. It was a silver V, very shiny. Each of the V wings, I would say, was like the size of probably two school buses. So it was fairly big, right? And I go, I'm in the car. I go, Dad, look, there's a UFO. Dad, there's a UFO. Stop the car. Stop the car. I'm 14 years old. We get out, walk in front of the car. I'm jumping up and down like this. Dad, there's a UFO. Dad, isn't this cool? It's Star Trek. Isn't this cool? Isn't this cool? 1970. My father looks up at this thing, man. He goes like this. He's looking at his watch. He's looking at his car. He's looking at his socks. Couldn't care less. It's like the Pyramid of Egypt is hovering over my father's car in daylight. I'm enthralled. My father couldn't care less. My dad had no expression, right? This is the whole key to the whole story. He wasn't scared. He wasn't happy. He wasn't interested. Zero. Okay, now, if you and I saw that thing together right now, like we'd be like high-fiving, right? We'd be like, our camera phones would be go crazy, right? We'd like, oh my God.
We'd be on the phone with our friends, we'd be telling everybody.
What a great sighting. Yeah, we'd be calling CNN. Oh, you got to get the New York Times. This is the greatest sighting ever. You got to see this. My dad couldn't care less. Okay. After 2 minutes, I'm going to say 2 minutes of watching this thing hover, and it just hovered. No propellers, no smoke, no sound. Just hovered, man. This huge thing was hovering. My dad looks at me and he goes, "Come on, kid, let's go home." Fine. So we got back in the car. We go home. I call rotary phone. I call the Asbury Park Press, my hometown newspaper. I go, "Hi, my name is Danny. I'm 14. I saw a UFO with my father." And the lady said, "Sonny, I can't talk to you right now. We're getting hundreds of phone calls about this. I have to hang up. I'm very sorry." I remember that very well.
Did that make the paper?
It never did. There was nothing. I looked. It never ran in the paper. So now, that was March 1970. I forgot that happened for 47 years. This is the whole story right here. I forgot about it for 47 years. Why? I was a drummer. I just gotten my drums for my bar mitzvah. I was in rock bands. I'm listening to Grand Funk Railroad and Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix. Man, I'm growing my hair long. My friends and I are chasing little girls. I'm not into UFOs and aliens. I'm into rock. I'm rock and roll all the way. My childhood from 10 was rock and roll music. Okay, so I forgot about it for 47 years. Now we come to April 2017, which is 47 years later. My father dies. He died in Florida with his second wife. He did not have a good death. It was not a good death. And he died. I was very sad. I saw him shortly before he passed. My brother and I said goodbye to him. He didn't know who we were. He had severe Alzheimer's. So he died. I'm in LA. I get the call. A couple of days later, I was sad and I couldn't work. So I went to my favorite deli in LA. I went to my favorite deli to get a pastrami sandwich and think about my dad. Okay. And everything I'm about to tell you this is all a true story. And I still can't believe it myself, really, but it's a true story. I go to the deli. I order a pastrami sandwich, man. The waiter walks away. I'm sitting there thinking about my dad. I'm thinking, God, my dad's gone. I can't believe my dad's gone. A beam of light or a beam of energy from above my head came from the ceiling, bang, into my head really hard like this. Bang. I felt it against my head. Bang. And then through my eyes and through my brain, and again, this is a true story, projected in the air, 6-8 inches in front of my face, is the home movie, color, color hologram home movie of the 1970 UFO sighting I had with my father. It's playing in the deli. I'm waiting for a pastrami sandwich. It's playing for me, just for me, right here, with audio. How about that?
Do you feel that that was a re-download, or was that an activation of a memory, or did you feel like that was a divine inspiration to recall?
It was a gift from my father from heaven.
A divine inspiration, yes.
That's what it was. Steve Bassett said, Dan, it was a digital download from ETs. I said, perhaps. I said, Stephen, I believe my father sent that to me from heaven, honestly. But here's what there's a lot of interesting things about this. This movie was not from my eyes, okay? It was not from my point of view. So it was not a memory, Bob. It was as though God was a cameraman standing with a camera like Cecil B. DeMille, like this, in front of my father's car. So I saw myself and my father and the car and the V. It was all in the frame, as though the cameraman was 10 feet in back of us. I saw me. You know what I mean? It wasn't from my eyes, because if it was from my eyes, it would have been a memory. It was. I call it God's home movie. It was God's home movie of the event. The universe recorded that event. Okay, so I'm jumping up and down. I go, Dad, look, there's a UFO, just like I remembered. And my dad looked bored to tears. And then, here's the killer. At the end of this little clip, my dad looked down at me. He winked at me. My dad winked at me, and he goes, come on, kid, let's go home. Okay? I watched it 30 seconds. No more than 30 seconds. Then this little home movie just vanished. It just completely vanished. Now, I hear in my right ear, get a pen, get a pen, get a pen, get a pen, get a pen. I asked the waiter for a pen. I put it in my right hand. There was a paper placemat on the table in front of me at the deli. And my hand wrote, automatic writing. I've never done it before or since. My hand wrote, write a book about benevolent aliens. Lead character's father knew about UFOs. And then I wrote capital A, capital T, capital C. Those three letters, and my hand stopped moving. So I'm looking at this paper on the table. I'm like, what the hell is happening to me? What's going on? And I just looked and looked and looked. And after a few minutes, ATC, I came up with After They Came as a title. So the book was given to me. It was given to me from above. Now, this is 3 days after my father died. Okay, so let's keep that in mind, right? Now, and then I finally got my sandwich, right? My pistachio sandwich. I inhaled it.
A bit startled.
Yeah, it finally came. I'm like, I got to eat this fast because I have things to do. And then I went home, and every day and night for the next 8 months, I wrote my book After They Came. I didn't go to the deli to write a book. I went to get a sandwich. I came back with a book in my head. I'm like, okay, well, I have to write a book now. I had only written Flirty with Fame. I hadn't written anything else before. Okay, now, who was my father? That's the whole key to this whole adventure. When I'm starting to write this book, I'm thinking, because right, one of the sentences was, in the book, lead character's father knew about UFOs. My hand wrote that, right? I'm like, then I go, God, I wonder if my father knew about UFOs. Now, my father worked as an electronics engineer and a physicist from 1951 to 1996 for Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, which was a U.S. Army base. Okay, so my dad was a civilian engineer for the U.S. Army, 45 years. Now, he started in 1951, right? The Roswell crash was 1947. Keep that in mind.
Where did your father grow up?
He grew up in Brooklyn.
Okay.
He's from Brooklyn. Now, my father was a genius, okay? He was a genius physicist. He was. Okay, so I'm writing the book after he died, and I called my mom. Now, my mom's still alive. My mother, I'm going to see her tomorrow. I'm going back east. She turns 90 in a few weeks. My mother's still alive. God bless her. I said, Mom, when you were married to Dad in all those years, did he ever talk about UFOs? She said, this is a great story, man, and I never heard this until after my father died. She said, in the early 50s, they took your father deep into the vaults, deep in the vault at Fort Monmouth Army Base, and they showed him something very, very top secret. And your father came home that night, My mother has a very good memory, even though she's 90. She goes, your father was pale and shaking and nervous and sweaty. And she goes, honey, what's wrong? And my father said, I saw something today at work in the vaults, and I can never tell you or anyone about it as long as I live. I can never tell anyone as long as I live. She said, your father was never the same after that day. And that's a quote from my mother. So something profound, my father was shown, okay? So that's one thing to keep in mind, okay? My dad, we always knew my dad worked on radar systems and missile systems. That we always knew, because he helped invent radar systems and missile systems for the Army. He always used to say, I helped America win the Cold War, and I'm a patriot. He never talked about his work when he was, no, he just never did. He used to go to the Pentagon all the time. When I was a kid in the 60s, my dad was always at the Pentagon. My dad went to White Sands Missile Testing Range. My mother said he went there all the time. I didn't know that until recently. Okay. In Richard Dolan's book, UFOs in the National Security State, Volume 1, in the back, there's a glossary of UFO sightings above U.S. military bases. And he has in that book, 1951 and in 1952, radar detected UFO sightings directly above Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. Well, my dad had just started working there at the time. Now, if he didn't see them with his own eyes, he had to have heard about that. Yeah. You would think if he's on an Army base, oh my God, yeah, there was UFOs, because he's working in the radar department, detecting UFOs. If he didn't see it with his own eyes, either one, he had to have heard about those events. He had to.
Well, yeah, those things have to be reported. I mean, you're in a sensitive area. Anything anomalous has to be told to the higher up the chain because it's data.
And my dad's whole job was data.
Yeah.
And he worked, and he was in the radar. He was in the Signal Corps. It was called the Ecom Evans Signal Corps. Okay. Now, after my father died, I looked through some old scrapbooks I had, and I found a 1985 profile of my father that had been written at his workplace. He gave it to me in the 80s. I put it in a scrapbook. I never ever read it. Never read it until my father died. So now after he died and I found it, I'm like, oh, maybe I should read this. My father invented military drones for the U.S. Army. How about that? How about that?
Yeah, people are under the misunderstanding that we've just been using drones in the last 20 or 30 years. No. These were being used and invented and worked on long ago. That's an interesting part of your history.
My dad helped to invent. I have it in writing. Military. He was in the military drone program. They tested. My father designed drones that were tested at White Sands. I have on this letter. It said he oversaw a test of a drone shooting a tank target on the ground with a laser and destroying the tank. I have it in writing. And this is for 1971, my father did that. So I'm like, holy shit, right? Well, my dad was my dad's a badass.
Yeah, there's some serious technology that we just, you just don't pull it out in small wars. And and that's probably one of those.
So that was that. Now, the kicker of all kickers, I think, is, and then I'll sum all of this up for you. Last year, Stephen Greer did a 3-hour press conference at the Washington Press Club in Washington. And in his 3-hour talk, he was talking about all the whistleblowers he has at the ready. As soon as, the Schumer rounds bill, God willing, it ever gets passed in Congress. But as soon as Congress passes laws to protect whistleblowers, Stephen Greer, I think he has something like 75, 80 men and women lined up. They're ready to go. They just have to know they're not going to be arrested. They're not going to get audited by the IRS. They're not going to lose their pensions. These are people, credible people, but they're not going to come forward till they're protected. So he gave a 3-hour talk. In his talk, he showed Bob a slide, a graphic of 145 U.S. military bases that he has proof of through these whistleblowers that worked on reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technologies, okay? So when I saw this, I was watching it on UFO TV, streaming channel. I freeze framed that slide, 145 U.S. bases. I stood up to my TV. I'm going like this with my finger. Number 51, Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, where my dad worked. Stephen Greer has proof that where my dad worked on reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology. How about that? So let's recap. I saw a major UFO with my father, right? He had no reaction and he winked at me. My mother said he saw something top secret in the 50s and he never told anyone about, and he never did. He never did. In Dolan's book, there were UFO radar sightings above Fort Monmouth. Stephen Greer proves that where my dad worked, they had they worked on reverse engineering. My dad went to the Pentagon all the time. My dad went to White Sands Missile Testing Range all the time. My father helped invent military drones. Add it all up, and we saw the UFO. And when he was looked at it, right, he either designed it, built it, saw it test fly a million times in White Sands. He knew what it was. Because the guy winked at me. He winked at me and said, come on, let's go home. He was bored. It was his work. It was his work, right? Mm-hmm. So after my father died, I found out who he was, and my father worked on UFOs for the military. I did a 90-minute talk on that topic for Contact in the Desert. On August 8th, I'm going to do it on a Zoom for MUFON, St. Louis. And it helped inspire me to write my book after they came.
How much do you think, so one of the things that's been posited by some individuals of the UFO phenomenon is that the phenomenon is actually an expression of something that occurred at a different time, that we had seances occurring here, and then we had the manifestation of a UFO there. I recently heard, and I can't recall who it was, maybe it was back in the 1950s, but the idea, 47, the idea was, I wish I could recall, it's a really good name, one everybody would know, that the question now that's being raised is, did he cause the Roswell crash? This individual who had been doing, I believe, magic or whatever you might want to call it. And
Aleister Crowley?
No, well, it was like Crowley. It was someone in America within the Army. And I wish I could, I know, there are people out there screaming going, Bob, this is who it is. And I wish I could recall right now. But I have asked this question to other people, right? I sort of use the Reagan example. It isn't that Reagan survived being shot, and it isn't that he was the first to do it. It's that he would go on to use astrology. And is it because he went on to use astrology that he was fortunate enough in the past to actually survive the event? It's a question of retrocausality. Because, using it before would have made a lot more sense. But the religion you get from it afterwards, does that have an effect of retrocausality? Because you're now so involved in the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, which why don't we get to next, do you think that might have something to do with your life of UFO and phenomenon experiences?
I had a paranormal experience at the age of 5. Which I've had in my head. I just turned 68. I've had it in my head for 63 years. I never, ever told a person this story with words. I had it in my head. I always knew it was something extraordinary, but I never told a person this story. Last year, I wrote my Paranormal Life, my book. It just came out a month ago. And I'll tell you the story, but to answer your question, for whatever reason, Bob, in the last couple of years, doors have been opening for me to follow the Hollywood ufology path. I'm a unicorn. I'm the only one of my kind. There is no other Dan Harary. I'm not bragging. I am the only one who has 40 years in Hollywood, 20 years of studying ufology, and 2 years immersed in ufology and being friends with Nick Pope, Richard Dolan, and Steve Bassett's my best friend, literally my best friend. So it's like these doors opened, and it goes to the deli sandwich story. It goes to that day. Had I not gone to get a deli sandwich that day, I don't know that my dad would have given me the home video, the home movie download from heaven, which led to my book. My book led to me meeting Stephen Bassett. Stephen Bassett and I created the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. I met and befriended everyone. I'm friends with Yvonne Smith and Deborah Coble and Kathleen Martin and Paul Hynek. I mean, these are my friends now, actual friends of mine. It's just remarkable what happened. So I've just been following these doors just the last few years. But going back to my 5-year-old story, let me tell you this story because I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. When I was 5, 1961, my parents and I lived in a little house near Asbury Park, New Jersey. And I had 2 little girlfriends that lived across the street, and they used to come. They were a little older than me. They were sisters. And they used to come play with me, and we used to climb trees and climb fences. That's what we did. We climbed things. So one day, they said, let's go climb the sign. There was a large billboard sign around the corner from my parents' house, a 30-foot tall billboard sign promoting the drugstore and the mini mall around the corner and down the bend from my parents' house, 2 blocks away. So we walked down there, and I'm 5 years old. They're probably 7 and 9, and I'm 5, these little girls. We walked down to the sign. We climbed up inside the wooden skeleton lattice that held up the sign. And we're climbing. And I remember this is really cool because we were pretty high up. And then for whatever reason, man, I remember this clearly. Both of my hands just slipped. There were wooden beams. My hands just slipped off the beam I was holding. And I fell backwards onto my back. I'm looking up at the sky. I'm on my back. And I'm falling through the air. I'm going to say had to be at least 20, 25 feet. Had to be. I'm falling through the air in slow motion. And these little girls above me are like screaming, right? Because they see me falling like this. I'm falling through the air, slow motion. Now I have missing time, okay? And I'm going to work with Yvonne Smith in a few weeks on this. I don't know if it was a minute, an hour, or 3 hours, but I woke up whenever 2 blocks away from the sign on a couch in an empty house. Empty meaning there was no one home. It was a furnished house, but no one was home. I'd never been in that house in my life. I couldn't tell you where the house is today. I don't remember which one it was. But I was alone in a house on a couch. I'm 5. I wake up. I remember waking. I was laying down on a couch. I woke up. My eyes opened. I sat up. I remember looking around. I go, hello. Is anyone here? No one was home. And I'm thinking, where am I? Where am I? I had no idea where I was. I get up. I turn to the right to leave. In front of the door, and this is a true story, and I'm trying to wrap my head around this. There was a cryptid being. There was a being 6 or 7 feet tall, a very tall thing. Wasn't a human. 2 legs. I describe it as the legs and torso of a donkey or a bull, and then the upper torso of an angel. But you could tell it had wings at one time because there were bony stumps on the shoulders. It looked like God had taken a hedge clippers and had cut off this poor thing's wings because they were just bony stumps where wings should have been, right? And the face of a bull. White chocolate color. It's crazy. This is what I remember. I look at this thing. This thing turns its head over her right shoulder, looks at me, goes like this. Snorted at me. Thing snorted at me. And I'm thinking, oh, he doesn't like me. I wasn't scared. I remember thinking, oh, he doesn't like me. And then he turned and he walked through now it was a screen door. I don't remember if he dissipated, vanished, or literally opened the door and walked out. But then he vanished and he was gone. And I'm just thinking, okay, all right. Then I went outside, followed him. I looked around. I realized my mother's house was 2 blocks to the left. And I said, well, I guess I should go home now, right? That's the whole story. Now I'm trying to find those 2 girls. My daughter's trying to help me find the girls on social media. They would be 70 years old and married, but I'm trying to find them. Whatever that entity was, Bob, that was day 1 of my paranormal life, because since then, angelic voices, spirit guides, UFOs, ghosts, poltergeists, coincidences that defy imagination, mind reading moments. I was a doppelganger in college for a year. Women used to come up to me and say, Jeffrey, is that you? I'm like, no. Are you sure? Am I sure? Yeah, I'm pretty sure because my name's Dan, so I'm pretty sure I'm not Jeffrey. And that just kept happening. All these crazy things. But that was the That was my door opener into the paranormal world, 1961. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
How much do you think, or what do you think might be the connection between what we might call the paranormal and these crafts we see in the sky? We keep hearing people, we've heard people say for a long time, Grant Cameron is probably the most famous of saying this, the whole thing is about consciousness. Right. So what is happening? What's the connection between what have otherwise been completely disparate subjects, which also includes things like Bigfoot and Atlantis, right? So what do you think is really kind of the bigger question of what's going on?
Oh, that's a huge question. A huge question. When I told my daughter the story I just told you last year, and she said, "Dad, it sounds like a gargoyle." So I Googled gargoyles. Gargoyles are cryptids that protect people and buildings within a certain specific geographic boundary. Okay. So if I fell off the billboard sign and if I died, I'm like, maybe I died. And this entity came. Well, clearly it saved me because I know it brought me and put me on that couch. That was a cryptid. So to me, look, I'm a big, huge person. I'm a big believer in ancient astronaut theory. When I heard it from Georgios Tsoukalos in person, 2007 at a MUFON meeting, 2 years before Ancient Aliens existed. I went to a MUFON meeting. He was the speaker, and he did 90 minutes on ancient astronaut theory. And I was literally like this, and I'm crying. I'm actually crying. I'm like, this is the most amazing information I've ever heard. Where has this information been all my life? Crop circles, Nazca Line, Stonehenge, the pyramids, Betty and Barney, Travis Walton, petroglyphs, cave drawings, UFOs in the Bible, right? Moses and the UFO, there was a UFO that hovered over Moses and the Israelites for 40 years. It's in the Bible. It's in the Bible.
Well, there were a lot of things described in the story of Moses that really have all the elements of what we might otherwise describe as high energy, right?
Well, manna from heaven was during the Israelites. Food was coming from heaven. Well, I don't know that God has the mechanical ability to send food from heaven, but extraterrestrials would, right? Extraterrestrials could part the Red Sea. Extraterrestrials could be the burning bush. Extraterrestrials could do the 10 plagues. Extraterrestrials could give Moses the 10 commandments and help him chisel out. I have a theory that aliens in that time period only spoke Hebrew because, there's so really think about it. There's so many miracles in the old Jewish Bible, right? I mean, the Old Testament. There's so many miracles. I think our aliens had a propensity for the Hebrew language. Anyway, the point is, these remarkable phenomena, they've been around since mankind began, if not even before mankind showed up. They've been around forever. Those of us like Steve Bassett, Stephen Greer, Danny Sheehan, myself through the media, we're people who are David Grush, people who are working toward disclosure. We're trying to push this ball forward and say, look, government and military, a way lot more than you're ever telling us. It's time, man. It's time. Let's share the information. We all know you know a lot. Share it with us. So we're trying to get disclosure, but it's been around forever. Between consciousness and I think extraterrestrials are interdimensional. That's my thing. I also think perhaps they're us from the future. I love that one. I absolutely love that. They're us from the future, right?
Well,
if you layer
simulation theory, if you layer simulation theory into this, it allows you to create iterations where the future impacts, right? Like, why can you never prove a UFO exists? And the answer is the moment you prove that UFO exists, then you prove that future exists. And you can't do that. That future hasn't happened yet. It's only a probability.
Well, if they're us from the future, right, and they land in Times Square tomorrow, and they say, "Hey,
probably,
hey, we're you from the future," well, that'll blow a lot of minds. That'll sure blow a lot of minds, man. We're you guys from the future, and we've been watching you, and we've been monitoring Earth since 45 because more often than we had, because nuclear bombs, we are not going to let you guys blow up our beautiful planet. You know all the stories, Bob Salas. You know all the stories.
I'm very familiar with those. We discussed earlier and talked about David. You mentioned David Grush and all of his work and testimony with Congress. Have you been following Tom DeLonge's work and Peter Levenda's work on disclosure? And do you have thoughts on their thesis?
I only know about Tom when he launched Academy to the Stars years ago. I never got the lowdown on why that imploded so quickly. But I'm not saying I got the idea from him, but I think the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance was almost born of a similar idea, right? My idea was to blend people in ufology, UFO experts, researchers, and experiencers, very big experiencers, with Hollywood writers, producers, directors, performers, by which to share stories so that they can develop screenplays and get new movies and TV shows made based on real life stories from real life people. That's what the Hollywood Disclosure is about. This is interesting. Steve Bassett, like 15 years ago, tried to do this in LA. In fact, that's when he met Thomas Jane and Paul Hynek. They had a little group in Marina del Rey. I think they met at a deli or a coffee shop, and they would tell UFO stories. And Steve Bassett was trying to make it happen. Well, 15 years later, he meets me, and I have 40 years in Hollywood. And then, 1, 2, 3. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying I had the ability to manifest the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance and make it happen. But Tom DeLonge is I've written to his people, hey, we'd love to have him join the HDA. I haven't heard back. But honestly, I don't know where he's at now. I don't know what's going on with him now.
Well, he's touring right now and playing a lot of music, and I'm sure he's got a variety of movies in play that he's working on. He is a substantially busy guy. But Peter Levenda and he are about to put out the third book in their series, God, Man, and War, and this is going to add some meat around why war happens, what are the uses of war, who benefits from war. And he makes an interesting point that much war is about colonization. And how does that happen? And what does that look like? And so, I think they have very interesting thesis. And I'm always curious if other folks have looked at the material and have thoughts on the thesis of God's Man and War.
That I don't know about that. But 4th of July, I spent the day with Steve Bassett. He was here in LA. We spent the whole day together. And he said, Dan, you got to read the UFO of God. You got to read the UFO of God. You got to read this book. You got to read this book. So I just got the book in Amazon yesterday. And I'm going back east to see my mom tomorrow on a plane. So I'm going to read the UFO of God, which apparently that guy the writer has incredible stories. Have you read that book yet?
I have not. And as you're mentioning that, I'm thinking of, here we go. I also recommend this one, which is Alien Worlds. And this is actually a collection of essays on the different religions that are attached, if you will, to the UFO phenomenon. And it lays them out side by side. One of them that's in here, I believe, is, was it?
You mean human religions? Judaism, Christianity?
No, UFO religions, but mean, as Peter Levenda says, all religion is cargo cult religion, so they're all cargo cults. But it lays out some different ideas about why religions exist, and if we had a religion of extraterrestrials, what might their social and religious dimensions look like? And all of them come from the same position. Not all of them. Most of them come from the same position, that there is this almighty God in charge, and we are all and all are subjects of their power. Sometimes they say it's Jesus, some give it other names, but it's all about a power structure from the top down. And then there's only one or two people in there who acknowledge that there possibly could be something going on from the bottom up. And that's what I found more interesting.
Well, I think this goes to ancient astronaut theory. There has to be God. And in fact, Eric von Daniken says, of course there's God.
And that's Tom
so,
and Peter's theory as well.
Yeah. I mean, because aliens, even if aliens made mankind, which of course they did, well, who made the aliens, right? I mean, there had to be an original source. In my book, after they came, I call God, the aliens in my book call God the infinite creator. That's the name they gave him. But let's say, okay, Jesus was a prophet, right? Muhammad was a prophet. Moses was a prophet, right? Ezekiel was there are prophets in the Bible who did extraordinary things above and beyond, right? But Jesus walked on water. Okay, that's pretty cool. Moses parted the Red Sea. Okay, that's pretty cool. Muhammad, I don't know about the Quran or Buddhism or Muslimism. I don't know those, but these guys did remarkable things. So there's God. Then I think there's extraterrestrials. Then I think they came to Earth. What, half a million years ago? They saw, our chimpanzee ancestors, like, trying to make a fire with sticks and twigs, right? And they're like, these are kind of strong beings. They're dumb as a rock. They don't know what the F they're doing, but they're strong. They could dig the gold. This is Zechariah Sitchin. You know this. They can dig our gold because apparently they needed gold. So they injected alien DNA into our chimpanzee ancestors, and that's the missing link. Suddenly, Cro-Magnon man became human beings, and our brains went from little walnuts to watermelons. In over the course of a few years, it happened very, very fast. So, I think God or extraterrestrials imbue certain people along the way. Moses, Muhammad, Jesus. They were above and beyond the fray. And each of them sort of inspired and led forward a religion. So I don't know if I'm just babbling, but I think all of it is I think it's all interrelated somehow. And this is funny. Somewhere in the Bible, I have to find this. Somewhere in the Bible, it predicted the Beatles. Somewhere in the Bible, it says something about four angels will come to Earth playing harps.
I believe strongly in that probability. In fact, one of my theses that I'm working on, I'll be putting out a new video on the land of Gog and Magog, is that you talk about this Cro-Magnon or the Neanderthal, and then there's humans. And the Neanderthal seems to have had the availability of high knowledge, which is to say they could create these megalithic structures around the world.
Yeah, right. Yeah, how did they do that?
Yeah, how do they do that? We don't seem to have any idea as humans whatsoever how they did that. That isn't to say that some of them may not have learned, but this was not a human endeavor. You get this on Easter Island as well, right? So Catherine Rutledge shows up there in 1916, 1917, and she says herself, look, I don't know who made these giant statues. It ain't the people that are here right now. They know nothing of these things.
We couldn't do that today. We couldn't do that today.
Yeah, we couldn't do it. Yeah. And so it occurred to me that where they have a lot of what you might call horizontal knowledge, they needed humans who have universal consciousness and can see across time. They can predict, but we can prophetize. And that is a dynamic advantage to anybody who likes to wage war.
Okay. I think you're way above my head now. You're over my head now. I can't keep up with you on that one, my friend.
It comes and goes. In any case, so let's take a moment and talk about the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. What sort of activities or things, along with accumulating names on your registry, is the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance engaged in forwarding the message of disclosure? What types of things can people help with at that?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. So when Stephen and I created it last year, we had a 3-hour lunch, and he told me his life story. I told him my life story. He said, Dan, what can we do together? And I looked up. I literally had a light bulb over my head. I looked at the ceiling. I said, Stephen, we're going to create the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. And he goes, that's it. Now, we didn't know what it was. We didn't know what it was going to be. I came up with 3 magic words. 4 days later was Contact in the Desert 2023. Last year, I was his guest. He introduced me to Nick Pope and Paul Hynek and Dolan and Ron James and Ron Janix, Katie Page and everybody, and George Norrie. And we're telling them all, Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. Oh, yeah. Nick Pope. Oh, yeah, I want to join that. Richard Dolan, oh yeah, I want to join it. George Norrie grabbed me. He goes, Danny, make sure I'm a member of your Hollywood. I go, okay, George, you're member number one. Okay, so that's how it was born. And then after that, Stephen and he visited again last summer here in LA. And I go, Stephen, okay, we have all the top UFO people in the world. We have 3 magic words. What do we do now? He goes, I don't know. So we were all last summer and last fall. What is the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance? What is it? What is it? What is it? Well, I had my daughter. She's a graphic artist. She created the logo, which you can see in the back there. She created a logo for us to make it real. She created a website for us to make it real. And then he just started inviting all of his contacts and friends and people, and I did the same on my end. And we literally just cut and paste our friends, peers, and colleagues together. So to answer your questions, a few things. One is, Stephen and I call it a networking group. It's, we don't make tires or pizza. We don't sell products. We don't do merchandise. It's almost like Match.com for ufology. I made that up recently. It's Match.com. So ufologists can meet Hollywood producers, because every ufologist wants to be in Hollywood, and a lot of Hollywood people want to know more about ufology. I have discovered that, man. I'll tell you that in the last year and a half. That's for sure. That's true. So we have our biggest thing that we have right now is a Slack channel. We have a Slack channel, and I'd be glad to put you in there if you'd like. All of our members talk to each other in the HDA Slack channel. I have a new script. I'm looking for women who were abducted and had their fetuses removed. Well, I know a million women that had that. I'm looking for people who've met Pleiadians. Well, one of my best friends hangs out with Pleiadians for 50 years. I just wrote a book. I'm looking for these kind of resources. Or I'm casting season 29 of Ancient Aliens. We need people whose fathers worked for the military. Well, I applied for that one for myself. So in our Slack channel, half of our members are ufology side, half are Hollywood, and they're talking to each other every day. It's very robust. Right now, that's the key. That's our golden ticket, is that Slack channel. It's like, if you don't know what Slack is, it's like an IM. Instead of one person to one person, it's one person to 100 people. You can all talk to each other at the same time. We do a series of live events. We did a kickoff last November in Hollywood. We did an event in March called The Making of Project Blue Book, the TV series. We had Paul and Joel Hynek on talking about who their father was, and all the producers of that show. It was fantastic, man. That was a 3-hour event. It was sold out. That was great. That was super cool. At Contact in the Desert, we had a booth, and we had a lot of our famous people, Nick Pope, Thomas Jane, Dee Wallace, David Foley. We had people signing autographs, Danny Sheehan, Steve Bassett. And I also had a panel at Contact. We had the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance panel. In September, 2 months from now, we're doing, Thomas Jane's going to do 90 minutes on visiting aliens to Earth. And Ron James is going to do The Making of Accidental Truth next, which is his next documentary film. So we do occasional events. Slack channel is every day. I'm going to resurrect the newsletter when I get to it. I'm busy. I'm a one-man show, but we had a newsletter. I have to resurrect that. And my ultimate goal is to do an annual Hollywood Disclosure Alliance awards event. And I already talked to Paul Hynek about this. I'm going to create an award called the Heine. The Heine. It's going to be the Dr. J. Allen Hynek Award for Excellence in Ufology, and we're going to call it the Heine. It's going to be the nickname.
I love it.
And Paul Hynek said, sure, that's pretty cool. I want to do that. So right now, if you join HDA, the Slack channel is the biggest. And if you live in LA, then the live events as well.
Really great. Well, listen, we're right at an hour here, and I want to thank you, Dan, for coming on today. Is there any last thing you'd like to tell anybody? Is there a channel or a hack you'd like to share? And I'll let you get that last word in.
Sure. Well, I'm a publicist, all right? So, of course, I'm going to do that. First of all, Bob, thank you very much. This was a lot of fun. Now I can go take my nap, because I take a nap at 4 o'clock. DanHararyAuthor.com. DanHararyAuthor.com. All my books are there. These that right behind me. We didn't talk about Five. Five just came out the other day. That's a dark fiction story about a serial killer who gets reincarnated over and over again throughout time. And my mother actually liked it, and my mother doesn't like anything. I thought your book was pretty good. I mean, that's unbelievable for my mother. It's like, Mom, oh my God, you liked something that I did? Really? So, Flirting with Fame is my Hollywood book. After They Came is my UFO book. 5 is my dark fiction book. And my paranormal life are real stories. My ghosts. My dad was a ghost. Visited me many times after he died. My grandfather was a poltergeist in my house 20 years ago. I proved that it was him through a Ouija board. All kinds of crazy, weirdo stuff. So DanHarariAuthor.com or Amazon. All my books are there. And for those of you interested in ufology, HollywoodDisclosureAlliance.org, O-R-G. We're looking for supporting members. We're a 401c3 nonprofit, and any dollar you send it to us helps us promote the next generation of movies and TV shows and documentaries based on real life stories from real life people. That's my personal goal in life, and I just turned 68, so what do I have? Maybe 30 years ahead of me, and I'm hoping to see. I'll tell you the truth. Well, I'll tell you the truth, Bob. As we speak, there are 3 or 4 TV shows right now, 3 or 4 TV shows that are being not incubated through HDA, but that I'm involved with, like from a Big Brother kind of thing. I'm like, wow, these people are really, it's happening. So HDA is becoming a real thing after only a year. So I'm very proud of it, and check it out. If you want to join, you can write to me there. And thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you. Everybody, Dan Harary. Peace and love to you. I will catch you on the next video, and have a great weekend, everybody. Peace out.
Bob.
Thank you, Dan.